Welcome to the Champs App podcast, where we help players and parents demystify the world of minor hockey development and recruiting for both girls and boys. On this episode, I talk with Cara Morey, who is the head coach of the Princeton Tigers women's college hockey team. During our conversation, we talk about being a multi-sport athlete growing up, the success of the Princeton program during her guidance, as well as the impact of COVID on the Ivy League and the college hockey recruiting process. This was a great conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. Before we get to our guest, if you enjoyed this episode and want us to keep making more of them, please share it with teammates and friends. You can also subscribe, like, follow, and even better, it would be great if you would leave us a review. Now, let's drop the puck and get to the show. I'm very excited to have on the Champs App podcast, Cara Morey, who is the head coach of the Princeton University women's hockey team. Originally from Hensel, Ontario, Cara went to Brown University for 4 years and played on the women's hockey team there. And after graduating, she spent 10 years starting a family and moving around the country. Then in 2011, she returned to the Ivy League as an assistant coach of the Princeton Tigers women's team. And then in 2017, became the head coach. During her time as the head coach, she's consistently been in the top 10, culminating this last year as winning the ECAC tournament before her season unfortunately ended. So I'd like to welcome Cara to the show. Hi, Cara.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Cara, really appreciate you having you on the podcast. Why don't you start off with just giving us your hockey history and telling us how you got to where you are as the head coach of Princeton?
Oh, goodness. It's kind of a long and windy path. I grew up in the middle of nowhere in Ontario, Canada, and so hockey's pretty much ingrained in our culture. But girls hockey really wasn't much of a thing when I was little. It was still for boys, and I had two older brothers. So I just kind of wanted to do everything they did. I, like most, women my age who played the sport, I was dragged around watching them and eventually worked my way onto the ice. And then when I was probably 8 years old, they switched me to ringette because that is what the girls played. And for anyone who doesn't know, that's a game in Canada and some other countries now where it's very similar to hockey in that it's on skates and there's, 5-on-5 with goalies and you're trying to put a ring in the net. But it's, a few different rules, a little more basketball-ish with zone defense and stuff like that. So I played ringette most of my life. I went probably as high as you could go representing Ontario in the Canada Games. And there was an unfortunate incident where I got ejected and had a significant suspension, and it kind of motivated.
And what did you get ejected for? I think it was being too nice to the other team.
I got intent to injure, but it wasn't true. I was not intending to injure. I was intending to get the ring. But they gave me a 5-game suspension. It ended the tournament. We were probably supposed to win it. So after that point, it kind of pushed myself and quite a few of my teammates to try hockey because it was starting to pick up steam in Southern Ontario. And so I went to the local team, and right away they sent me about an hour away to London with the Devilettes, told me to play there. So I ended up playing 2 years with them. But my first year I got recruited by...
How old were you at this time?
Like 17.
Okay.
I think when I started hockey. It sounds really late, but again, I played 8 sports in high school. I was like just kind of a little tomboy, a little, jock. So I was familiar with sports. So I know it sounds crazy starting hockey at 17, but like it was a skating game and I could skate very well. So it was one of my first tournaments that Digit Murphy reached out and was like, "Hey, do you want to come play hockey at Brown?" And I had never heard of Brown. I don't think I had ever left the country of Canada. I think I've been on a plane twice to go to nationals for ringette. So like literally my town had 1,000 people. So I ended up going to see her school. I didn't know it was a recruiting trip. I still hadn't heard of Brown. In the end, it looked amazing. They had a locker room. I remember calling my mom and saying, "Mom, you get to keep your equipment at the rink. This is where I'm going." So that's all it took for me at the time to pick my future, which is very short-sighted. And I've learned so much more since, but I was really blessed. I ended up in the Ivy League and it was life-changing. So that's where I ended up meeting my husband. After that, I did go on, I went back to McGill actually and played with the Montreal Stars in the NWHL, and I played in Brampton. I played with the under 22 team for Team Canada, and I was training with the national team when I broke my femur snowmobiling. And it kind of put a little bit, it put a pause enough, and then my husband's career took off, which brought me to the US. And I
Hey, Cara,
basically, yeah,
can I ask you a couple questions about your time at Brown?
yep.
So first, I know enough about Ringette to be dangerous, and that some of the skills that you have in Ringette you aren't transferable, or some of the skills needed for hockey you don't get in Ringette, like stick handling and slap shots.
Yep.
So how did you develop those? At the age of 17, when you hadn't really played hockey before, and was it because of the other sports that you played, such as field hockey or any of the other 7 other sports that you played?
So my players even today will tell you I still can't stick handle because they give me a hard time all the time. That was definitely like my drawback. That was the weakness of my game. But I did play field hockey, and I actually played field hockey at Brown also. And so it's similar. Anybody who knows field hockey can't use the backside of your stick. So I had hand-eye coordination from the other sports and from field hockey specifically, but stick handling wasn't my strength. That was more of a stay-at-home defender. I figured out how to take a slap shot pretty quickly. I don't think it's a really hard technique, and my wrist shot was great because of Ringette. Like the wrist shot's almost the exact same. But I think what Ringette did the best was that you always skate with your head up. You can see the play developing because you never have to look down to know if the ring is on your stick, and so it makes the best skaters with great vision. And as a D, those are probably 2 of the most important things in hockey.
Nice. And what was it like being a dual sport athlete at Brown? Like how were you able to handle that? Were they complementary, or were you like Bo Jackson? Like, did you have a game in the morning for hockey and then a field hockey game in the afternoon, and you're getting on a helicopter to go between stadiums? What was that like?
It was amazing. And that's one of the saddest things I find today is that more athletes don't play multiple sports. Honestly, field hockey helped my ice hockey, and ice hockey helped my field hockey. And sometimes like you need a break from one, and the friendships I made outside of it. But yeah, they were complementary, but also just so refreshing to have too. And I did have like my favorite memory of my whole college career was my senior year. And the seasons were a little different back then. Like hockey season started a little later. So my last field hockey game was against Yale, and we ended up beating them, I think like 3-2. I should look this up someday. And I think I scored a goal in that, and we played up on the roof of the OMAC, and we were playing Minnesota 2 hours later. So I literally ran off the roof, ran right into the rink. Our team had already finished warm-ups. I ran in my skirt and everything, got all my gear on, jumped on the bench for hockey. They were feeding me Coke on the bench for calories, and played that game. It went into overtime. Wow. And I actually assisted the game-winning goal for us to beat Minnesota in that game. So that was probably one of the best memories of my life, because it was nothing I enjoy more than competing and being with my teammates. So to do both sports in one day was incredible.
That's awesome. I'm just curious, do any of your players today have the ability to play on 2 teams, or do you not let them do that?
Oh, I would allow them for sure. It's much more challenging now because the sports have gotten longer and longer. So now you see hockey starting in September. It used to start in November. So it's much harder to play a fall sport. We have had players do lacrosse and hockey, but now lacrosse is also starting in February, and we're going to the NCAAs in March. So the crossover is much more significant. But for me personally, I would try to accommodate athletes to do both if that's what they wanted. We're just finding it's harder and harder as all sports are becoming year round.
All right, let's get back to your time after Brown and your journey across the United States.
Yeah, so after I broke my femur and my husband's career took off, his job, we had to travel around quite a bit. So we were going city to city quite often. And I would look for girls hockey to get involved with. So when we were in Pittsburgh, I volunteered with Robert Morris, and that was a school that wasn't around when I played, so I didn't really even know what it was, but I got to go in and help out with them for a few times a week. And then when we were in Arizona, they obviously didn't have college hockey back then, and still don't for women really, but I coached the Lady Coyotes, they were called, which was an under 19 team. So I tried to stay involved in hockey a little bit, but I would say mostly I was pretty out of the game for those 10 years.
What was hockey like in Phoenix back then? I don't know if you've tracked what Lindsay Fry's been doing with the Arizona Cachinas, which is what they're now called. They're no longer called the Coyotes. And she's gotten them to have their own rink and the whole development focus. She's done some amazing things. I don't know if you heard the news last week. It was announced as one of the announcers as a color commentary for the Coyotes. She's done some amazing things. But what was Phoenix like back then for hockey?
Yeah, she's amazing. It was interesting. She had actually just left for prep school when I arrived there before. I think it was just before she went off to Harvard. So it was interesting because you actually would get, because Arizona has a lot of Minnesota transplants, people, snowbirds trying to get away. You'll get a lot of Western Canadians that are going to Arizona. And then when they start a family there is some hockey culture just because of all the transplants. So the problem was once they hit around 13, 14 and had potential, they'd take off to the East Coast to play. So it was hard keeping them around because, your closest team might be Colorado. So it's a really difficult family lifestyle. So I think the girls with a lot of talent, and probably the boys back then, like Austin Matthews was around back then in that mini rink, Aussie Ice, I think it was called. So it was difficult back then, but there was probably 4 or 5 rinks in the Phoenix area that were always full, having stuff going on. It's just once you hit a certain age, you had to make the decision. All right, if I want to focus on hockey, where am I going to go? Because staying was pretty difficult.
It's very similar here in San Jose. The girls program, their best team is the 16 team, because by the time they get to 19, the best players have moved on.
Yeah.
Go ahead. So after Phoenix, then?
So and my husband retired when we were living in Arizona, and I was like, hey, I think it's my turn to start working, and my passion has always been teaching. And so I actually did a master's of education and got my teaching certificate, and I was in the high schools in Arizona. And I really always thought about coaching. It's I completely forgot about this, but at Brown, my nickname was CIT, given to me by my coaches and captains, which meant coach in training. I completely forgot. Like, I look back as I tell the story now and realize it really was part of my path. But at the time, 10 years being away from it, I didn't realize it was always in my path. It was just kind of a hobby. So I called a bunch of coaches, college coaches, and I asked them, like, tell me about the profession, tell me about this, to get input. And the sad truth is the majority of them said, don't do it. They said, if you're a woman, and especially a mother, coaching isn't a good career. And thank God I was always raised, and it's probably because I had older brothers. It's like, if you tell me don't do something or I can't do something, it's the first thing on my list. And so it was probably good that was it, because I was like, what? I'm going to show them wrong. So I applied to Princeton. And honestly, too, I always said there was only a few schools I would coach at, because, our ethos had to align, and education was huge for me. It changed my life. And so for me, there are only a few programs that I would consider getting involved with. And Princeton happened to have an opening. And I just feel like sometimes you get a lot of signs. And I always feel like if you keep getting the same message multiple times, you need to do it. So my coach, Digit from college, called me and she's like, Princeton's open, you need to go for it. And I was like, I haven't even been in the game in a decade. She's like, so I put my name in there, and I got a call from Jeff Campersall, and I flew out and I got the job, and he was like, can you start in 2 weeks? And I'm like, I have a family of 5 and we live in Arizona. So it was a quick transition. And again, from basically no experience, I went into Princeton, and it might have been less than a month later that the first assistant, Amy Bourbeau, got the head job at Brown. Oh. So instead of looking for a new first, I just got promoted to first assistant, and I had 0 experience. So I went from essentially being a stay-at-home mom to being the first assistant at Princeton within a month. So it was crazy and it was awesome, but I just like it clicked. It was what I was meant to be doing.
Do you think it had to do with you coming from Brown University because that prepared you? So apparently, Brown University is a factory for college coaches. Katie King Crowley, who I believe is at Boston College, also from Brown. So obviously, there's something with how you were developed and how you were taught and trained.
We have Cassie Turner, the head coach at Quinnipiac, Katie King at Boston College. We have Jody McKenna, who's at Wesleyan. I mean, those are just a few off the top of my head. Haley Moore, who just got named head of hockey operations for the American Hockey League, which is incredible. And it's because, Digit coached us, and she was a mom. And that was the other thing when they said moms, it's a tough life. Well, I watched Digit raise 4 children while she coached us.
So you had a role model.
Of course, they say, see it, you can be it. And that's what it was. Of course you can do it. It didn't look easy. I'll tell you that. There were times that I knew she was juggling so much, and she had young babies at the time, and, but we knew it could be done.
Awesome. All right. So now you're back at the Ivy League at Princeton, and you're the first assistant coach. Tell us about your first few years there, and then how you moved into the head coaching position.
It was really interesting because I had no idea. Like, all I knew is how I had been coached, but I had a lot of different coaches, but obviously Digit, a big influencer, but being on the national team, I had coaches. Being in the NWHL, I had coaches. So I knew basically how I was coached and what I thought worked and didn't work as a player. And then the culture was a little different at the time. We weren't like we had great hockey players, but the culture wasn't where Princeton was at the top of the league back then. I think my second year, we actually didn't even make playoffs for the ECACs. And a big push for me, which is I think something we also learned at Brown, was investing more into the culture of the program outside of the hockey. So Brown women's hockey is the oldest women's hockey program in the nation. And we knew that. And what Digit did very well was teach us that we were just a part of the puzzle, and we were just a part of the story, but we always learned about the women who came before us and what they had to do. So that was a big push for me, was bringing, like, Princeton is one of the most historic schools in the world. So I wanted to really start playing off the history of the program and making them feel what it meant to be a Princeton Tiger. So
yeah, I actually didn't know this until yesterday, that both Hobie Baker and Patty Kazmaier are Princeton grads. And for folks who don't know, the top individual awards in hockey for both men's and women's are Patty Kazmaier and Hobie Baker. So their awards are named after them.
And everybody should know that they're from Princeton. Honestly, that's my goal. Everybody should know that Princeton has deep, rich hockey roots. And I think that story wasn't told enough. So it was mostly about that. It was, recruiting a little differently. I just went into a few different markets maybe and found some different types of players, and just slowly chipping away at building, a great hockey culture at Princeton.
Nice. And so tell us about you becoming the head coach.
So when Jeff decided to go try Penn State, a different look, like a scholarship school, I knew I wanted to become a head coach also. I was trying to look around and see what openings, because I actually didn't think Princeton would ever open up. But when it opened up, I knew I had to apply, and I went through the formal interview process. It was tough. It was it wasn't just handed to me. I had to go through 6-people committee, grueling questions. But I had great alumni support. I had great parent support. And I even had, what was amazing to me was my AD later told me she got letters of support from my colleagues, from other NCAA coaches saying, wow, you need to hire. And that was huge for me. That was just so it's inspiring. It made me feel so good.
That's awesome. And so for what is really noticeable when I went back and looked at, some of the stats for your team is that, the last 3 years have pretty much been some of the best 3 years of the program. You've always been in the top 10. So what is it that you did that, changed the trajectory to go even further up? Was it the coaching? Was it the recruiting? Was it, as you said, kind of some of the off-ice stuff?
I mean, it was a long process. So it was, probably 7-8 years in the making. When you reach the championship, it's not a 2-year thing. So the players we had early on when I started, trying to change the culture, make it a little bit, more demanding, a little bit more hockey focused, they then snowball it, right? And so it's little stepping stones along the way that our alumni did also that then change the culture for the freshmen coming in, and then it kind of gains momentum. So I think culture change was huge. I think recruiting is obviously massive. Like we ended up getting some of the top players. So many national kids are now a part of our program that maybe weren't in the past. And so people are starting to look at Princeton as a hockey destination. So it was just a culmination of years and years and years of work, and it just happens to come to fruition in those years that I got to step in.
Gotcha. So what kind of coach are you on the bench? Are you nice and calm and quiet? You just give it a little pat on the back, all the work was done.
I'm the worst. I am the worst. I like my poor assistants. Like I think they all need earplugs, and I can't help it. Like I don't even realize I'm doing it, but I've really been thinking about it, and what I'm doing, which is so annoying, is I'm like calling play-by-play. So I used to be a ref, and so I see the game as a coach, but as a ref, and in the moment, like I feel like I'm in the booth, like calling the game. Like I'm not telling the players what to do and stuff, but I'll be yelling offside, or I yell icing a lot. Like I get made fun of so badly, and I'm tough on the refs. I'm very respectful.
Do you put your hand up on the bench?
Yeah. Okay. And I'm doing this one a lot, and I'm trying to work on it, to be honest, but I tried to be really quiet a couple games, and my players were like, don't do that. It's weird. It's weird when you're quiet. So it's kind of the culture of our team. If they're, our players are loud, like sometimes I have to rein them in. There's a ton of emotion, a ton of energy, a ton of chaos on our bench, but we kind of thrive in that atmosphere. So the people who are drawn to our program are drawn to like the high energy, the really intense, the kind of a little bit goofy at the time. And so I'm trying to find that nice balance. Like I don't want to be a major distraction, but I think people they kind of get used to it, and it's like a comforting background noise now to some of my players. So
got it. So I had Darryl Belfry, who you're probably familiar with, is one of the top NHL skills coaches. And he really talks about the importance of skill development at any level. It doesn't matter what it is. So I'm wondering what you offer to your players in terms of skill development during their 4 years playing for you.
Yeah. I think a lot of programs focus on just systems and winning, and they think they've got finished products when they get to college. But for us, we focus a lot on development. And there's two reasons. They're not even close to done developing. So if I want to get the most out of my players, I got to spend these 4 years making them better with skill development. But also a lot of my players have aspirations to go on and play either professionally in North America, in Europe, or Olympics. And so a big part of our job and our responsibility is to get them ready for that. So we do a ton of skill development. We'll have small group skills weekly. We'll have individual skills at any time. Our players come up and they say, hey, can you jump on the ice? That's the beauty of having your office right in the rink. So if they have a break and they want to jump on the ice and we'll do skills, we can jump on for 30 minutes, half an hour, whatever. But we also have probably one practice a week that's really more heavily skills based anyway. So it's really a focus of ours is skill development. And I think it's shown a lot because like we've had quite a few players who were not on the under 18 teams. And historically in women's hockey, if you don't make that under 18 team, you're probably not getting in there at the older years. But we've had Kelsey Colzer, who came in as a forward from Horsham, Pennsylvania, that nobody knew, and actually turned her into a D, and she became an All-American defender and was part of the national program within 3 years of playing defense. Claire Thompson right now was cut from the under 18 team, wasn't, and then she just made the world championship team 4 years later. So like a big part of ours is development. We had Carly Bullock, who wasn't even invited to the big final 64 camp for USA when she was 18, and then scored 96 goals for us over our career and is now with the senior team. So development is huge. And that's, I think, one of the things we provide to our players is like, listen, if you want to get here, like that's our job, is to take you there.
Do you do a lot of video as well?
Oh my gosh, we do video every day.
Great.
Yeah.
So for the Chance App website over the holidays, I did an analysis on women hockey coaches in Canada and the US. And I saw that only 1/3 of the US Division I coaches were women, and 2/3 of their assistants were women. So overall, a little over 50%. But you are bringing up that average since 100% of your staff is women. So, and I assume that is not a coincidence, that is by design. So can you explain your thought process there?
Yeah, this can be a bit of a controversial topic, but I do feel strongly that part of my job is to help open doors for future women and to help develop female coaches, because I think that we don't have enough mentors. Whenever you were little and it's a male dominated sport, like even the girls, they're watching NHL guys, there's just not enough mentors. So I have this discussion with my players every time it's time to hire. And I said to them, I'm not going to hire someone that's going to be detrimental to the program just based on gender. But if all things are equal, then I'm going to be hiring the woman, and I canvas and I search for women. And I look for ones that, you know, want to get into the game and want to develop, and I learn a lot from them at the same time. So it is conscious. I'm not going to say you'll never see a male on my staff, but I'm really trying to help change the dynamic, open more doors. And I also said to my players when we talk about it openly, and I said, there are so many leagues that men can coach in. There are so many leagues all over, from college to juniors to minor pro to pro. And this is it for women. There's not enough doors open outside. You don't see women. We're so far behind in hockey. You don't see women coaching in the men's game still. You see them now getting into office positions and scouts and skill positions, but they're still not hiring them to coach. So for me, that I have to bring them in because this is one of the only leagues they can coach in.
Nice, nice. So speaking of your league in the ECAC, and in the Ivy League specifically, correct me if I'm wrong, there's only about 29 or 30 games in a regular season compared to some of the other conferences. Well, they'll get up to 40 games, roughly speaking, before playoffs. Is that work for you, or is that actually, kind of something you have to battle against?
I mean, there's always two sides to everything. So we play 29, they play 36. I think it's like a 7-game difference. And we sometimes will get, players who say, well, I want to play 36 games. And it's just such a short-sighted decision when you're picking your college future, right? Like 7 games is what you're going to decide your whole life around. So, it can be a blessing. Like you saw us and Cornell had both been primed to be in that national tournament for the last few years. Part of it could be we're more rested. Like our season is a little bit shorter. It does get long and grinding. Like we don't start until middle of October. They've started in September. That extra month, leads to more injuries, leads to more fatigue. So you can phrase it any way you want it, which is what we do when we recruit. But it really, to me, 7 games shouldn't be a big enough factor to be a decision maker when you're deciding where to play college hockey.
Got it. So we're going to start getting into the recruiting process, but most importantly, as it relates to recruiting, is the Philadelphia airport closer to Princeton, or is it the Newark airport? And you have them fly into Philadelphia so they can, get a really nice experience as they head up the turnpike.
So funny that you know that. They're equidistant, so sometimes it's whatever's most convenient. We always joke that if we fly them into Newark, we're gonna put nose plugs and a blindfold on them, because once you get 20 minutes, it's beautiful. Like New Jersey is so beautiful, and I kind of am glad people have that funny, stereotype about it, because to me, it actually reminds me of Canada. Like it's so green. But Newark, so sometimes you fly them into Philly to have a better drive, but usually lately, by the time it's official visits for the last while, they had already committed. So it was more of a formality. But early on, when I started, choosing the airport was a question for a minute.
Yeah, and the campus is beautiful. I was there once for a wedding, and folks I hadn't seen Princeton. I mean, it's just spectacular. So you kind of mentioned Cornell. Let's just talk about the end of your season last year. So you guys made it to the final, winning the finals of the ECAC. I believe it was for the first time ever, and against your nemesis Cornell, who you've been
Yeah.
clearly battling the last few years, and I know they think they were the best team in the country. And then yet you were ready to go to the playoffs, and something similar happened to us, where my son just Pee Wee hockey. We were flying down to Southern California for the state playoffs, and we had to fly to San Jose. We went through the airport security, and we got the email saying all the playoffs have been canceled due to COVID. Maybe you could tell your story about the end of your season, winning the last game, and then kind of what happened afterwards, unfortunately.
Oh gosh, yeah, it was amazing. What an amazing end to our season, and tragic at the same time. So,
Please tell the band story.
what's that?
Please tell the band story in the
Okay.
overtime games.
So, yeah, well, first of all, we had some awesome. Quinnipiac really helped get us ready for that weekend, honestly. It was such a grueling series. We had them in a 3-game series. I think we went to overtime and then double overtime. So we had been battle tested, which was huge. And then we had to face Clarkson, who 3-time national champion. Like, historically, most of our players have not had the best success against Clarkson. And it was just an amazing game where every puck went our way, and we ended up beating them 5-0, which, like, for our players is like, oh my gosh. So then I didn't know that Princeton had never been in the ECAC championship game ever. I couldn't even, like, I didn't even think that was a thing. I found out the night before. And so when we were going into that game, obviously Cornell was hosting it. If anyone has been to Cornell, especially for playoffs, like, they do a great job. It is packed, and their fans are hostile, and their band, like, we always have issues. Their band is like so obnoxious, but like in a good way for them. Incredibly loud. The arena, like, you couldn't hear yourself think. So it was really hard to even talk to the players. It was an incredible environment. And so I don't know if it was nerves, or if maybe just coming off that 5-0 win was too much, but we started that game. We thought we were ready, and we were down 2 goals on the first 2 shifts. So we were down 2-0 to Cornell, the #1 team in the nation, ranked, at their place with their fans and their band. And I remember just all the players looking at me. It hadn't even been 3 minutes into the game, and I was thinking, okay, what should I do? And I looked, do I pull our goalie? Our goalie is outstanding. She was one of the top goalies in the country, senior. But our other goalie, Rachel, had won the Quinnipiac series, the 3rd game. We were kind of going with 2 goalies, but I didn't know what kind of a tone that would set. I didn't know whether I should call a timeout. You get 1 a game, and kind of blast them, like, let's go. But instead, I just kind of looked at them, and it was time to just kind of feel where they were at. And I was like, hey, we have 57 more minutes of hockey. And then what's really funny is our 3rd goalie just started dancing to the band. And I was like, uh-oh. And then the defense started dancing. And then all of a sudden, like, our whole bench is dancing, and we're down 2-0 to the. So I was like, uh-oh. And we just kind of let it go. And then they started playing hockey, and they started getting loose. And we got out of that period. It was still 2-0, but we stopped the bleeding. And I just kind of went into the locker room, and we talked about it, and I was like, how cool is this environment? I was like, let's pretend these fans are for us. And the girls are like, yeah. And then I was like, how crazy is this band? And they're like, oh my gosh. I'm like, let's pretend it's our band. And they're like, oh yeah, And so as we were going in, and we picked up momentum, and I looked over as we were about to take the ice, and I could see our girls dancing before entering the ice, and I was like, oh God, what are they doing? And they were kind of like taunting the Cornell band, and they had like a couple favorite songs that they decided to start. And then when the Cornell band started playing, they started dancing to the band. And so they came out, and I think we scored in the first 3 minutes. And Sarah Fillier scored that goal. When she scored that goal, I knew we were winning that game. Like, I could just tell they completely hijacked the environment. Every time the crowd was going, let's go Red, our bench would stand up, and I was like, okay, like, they just completely took over the environment. And by the time we left the 2nd period, we scored again, and had a 2-2 game. And it took to overtime, and it was like just incredible to rewatch that game-winning goal. It was like a fluky bounce type went in, but I knew we were going to win just based on the environment and the culture and the emotion of our players at that point.
Nice. And that was ended up being, unfortunately, the highlight of the season.
Yes.
So what happened next as you were
So we
preparing
went
for the
back
Frozen
and we
Four?
were getting prepared for Northeastern, and I'm sure every coach kind of looks back and wonders, but I just feel like we had something magical at that moment. Like we were so confident we were going to go in and make it through to the Frozen Four, and I really just think that that team was unstoppable in that moment. And the way they were preparing, the way they had bought in, the way they cared for each other, their enthusiasm around like their jerseys and who they were, like it was magical. And so we were trying to get out. Something in my mind is like, let's get there and then they'll make us play. Let's just get there. And then our AD was like, we want you to wait till tomorrow to leave, because we were going to leave like 2 days in advance to get a practice in, get on their ice and get ready for that environment. And she's like, let's just wait a day. And I was like, uh-oh. And then we got all packed. We're all waiting, our bags, the bus is outside, and our admin came and they're like, we don't have news yet, but let's just like, you're only going to Boston. Let's just wait a bit. Let's just wait a bit. And that never seems to be great news. And I think they were waiting on a decision, even though they weren't sure. And so all our bags are lined up, and then it actually got leaked on Twitter, which is the worst way to find out that NCAA was canceling everything. I have never witnessed devastation like that in my players. Carly Bullock, like she was 4 goals away from 100 goals, and I feel like she was definitely going to get it. She didn't think about that at the moment, but that's what I was thinking about. And I don't think I've seen someone cry for that many hours straight. It was probably 36 hours that our seniors were just crushed. Our whole team was devastated. Like we tried to have a really quick, because we knew they were sending everyone home. Like we didn't know how we could wrap this up. So we just called a local restaurant and tried to have a quick, like just team get together, gave our seniors their jerseys. Again, like the tears didn't stop. And this was a day later, like just tried to do a makeshift kind of banquet, like celebrate everything they did as they went home. But they were devastated, like devastated.
Yeah, that's just like crushing, I can imagine, right? Especially
Yeah.
unfinished business. That's the
Unfinished
worst.
business. I say that the great thing is, I try to point out, is there's not many seniors that get to win their final game of their career. It's usually one team a year.
Exactly.
So
And even
there
then,
was
only a handful of seniors on that team. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think they hold on to that, and I think that they'll have great memories of what they did, but there's always that little piece of what could have been.
Nice. Okay. So now we're into COVID.
Yep.
For folks who don't know, the Ivy League was canceled this year. Maybe you can just give us an update on where things are at for your team and the league.
Oh, geez. It's been a really tough year. It's been a tough year for our players. It's been a tough year for the league, for sure. I think our players we kind of, just going through what we went through, losing the playoffs, we had a feeling this would happen. Like we talked about it a lot. We figured there'd have to be a vaccine, and one coming before winter season was just so unlikely. So a lot of our players opted to take the year off, stay home and train and do internships. And so most of my players, and then Princeton didn't bring students back to campus. So most of my players are at home training, and we meet weekly or bi-weekly, and we really are trying to do something special during this year. Like we have players that are, traveling obviously within their country because it's hard to get outside of it, but doing things they might not have done otherwise, taking advantage of this time with family, taking advantage to do really cool internships that they wouldn't have had time to do. So, and of course, maintaining training, which gets tough when it's going to be like 18 months before they put the skates back on. So we definitely have some challenges ahead of us, but they're certainly very excited to get back and get playing next year. So it's hard. It's hard to watch other teams compete when you can't. But they kind of had reconciled with it, and we try to talk about what blessings can come out of this each time.
So I believe on your team from last season, you had 5 juniors. So that means this year you'd have 5 seniors. Are they going to come back for a the fifth senior year, so to speak?
So the Ivy League is a little bit different. You can't really like, I'm trying to figure out how to explain this. So in the Ivy League, most schools only give you 8 semesters to graduate. So if you enroll and you're going through school, you have to graduate on time. So they will have a 5th year if they're enrolled, but you can't do it in the Ivy League. So they'll have to use that year towards a graduate degree somewhere else. The Ivy League doesn't allow graduate students to compete.
I didn't know that.
Right. So
That means you're losing players that you don't really want to be losing.
Well, so that's why our players actually took the year off of school.
Oh, I gotcha.
So they'll all reclassify.
So it's a gap year, yeah.
They're all, most of them are on a gap year. So the team will come back and you know, whoever was going to be a junior this year will still be a junior when they come back.
Gotcha. All right. Well, now we're going to get into the recruiting process. So the most obvious next question is, well, how does this affect, you know, the people who are supposed to be coming in or the folks that you want to be recruiting? You know, does it push everything back by a year for your recruiting classes?
Not for us. We did a good job like managing our numbers and making sure we always had a pretty small roster to begin with, like not excessively large. So, you know, we had to reclassify a couple, but not like two players only. So for us, because we didn't get too far into this early recruiting and overcommitting, it's going to be okay. I think we are going to see this effect nationwide. I think that, I mean, schools are going to have to decide, from what I understand, the scholarships have to decide who they're going to give that 5th year to, whether they're going to allow them to come back, whether they're going to give them their scholarship money or they're going to have to pay for the extra year, because it does get expensive. And then in the end, I think they go back to only having 18 scholarships. So there's going to be a lot of juggling. And I think that the 22s, the juniors in high school right now are feeling it, because like for us, let's say, instead of filling up that class, we just kept it smaller. So I think you're going to see that across the board. And I think a lot of 22s then might decide whether they're going to take a post-grad year, which will then squeeze down to the 23s. And then I think this is going to take 3 to 4 years to sort itself out.
Yeah, of course, of course. All right, well, let's kind of pull up then and just talk about overall the recruiting process. Let's start with the most basic thing, admissions and academics. I know you talk about this a lot, but at the very simple level, can you talk about GPA versus course selection in terms of what you look for in terms of on the academic side? And then maybe you know, I know a lot of parents tell their kids, like, you want to make yourself at least academically eligible, even if you don't make it as a hockey player. What percentage of players just rule themselves out just by not being academically qualified to come to a school like yours?
Yeah, well, it's definitely difficult to get into schools in the Ivy League because they are, you know, very academically driven. But we find that players who care about their academics and their futures do really well. We're not, you know, we're not collecting all the valedictorians for our team, or I don't know that we would compete very well, but there are players who definitely just are ineligible for the Ivy League based on, you know, their grades in high school. But again, they're not, our players are not all straight A students, but they care about their academics and they put in effort and it's something they value. And that's usually your best candidate. So, you know, we don't have like a strict GPA or anything. It really is like the application process, they're looking at everything, but there is minimum standards. Like, you know, if people are pulling off C's and D's and F's, the Ivy League also just isn't the right fit for them. And plus
they're not going to succeed there anyway. Yeah.
No. And probably anywhere. Like, I think that athletes have to, and for the most part, schools, like, you know, schools that are high achieving, whether it's in sports or, you know, academically, they attract high achieving players, you know, and most athletes that are driven, that's how they're wired. So it's not like there aren't many athletes I've seen that are like so driven to like be great at hockey at the expense of school. Their drive translates to all areas of their life. So I feel like the best hockey players are usually quite driven academically too, because it's just an internal demand on themselves. Like, they want to be great at everything they do. They want to be great in school. They don't cut corners. And that's why you'll see so many of these top players in such great academic schools because it's who they are. They're hardwired to like do things the right way, put in the effort, don't cut corners, don't slack in any area of their life. And that's, you know, that's kind
Be
of
the best they can be in everything they do. Yeah.
yes.
Got it. All right. So I know you talk about this all the time, but let's talk about no athletic scholarships in the Ivy League, and therefore tuition in the Ivy League is around $50,000 these days, which is nuts, but it is what it is. I'm sure you can recite this rotely. Talk about financial aid, and you know what the Ivy League schools offer, and why it's an important factor, but really is, you know, can be managed out. And specifically, what I'm most interested in is academic scholarships. Do some of your players get academic scholarships, which kind of offset some of the financial aid that they might need?
First of all, I'll answer that one first. There is no merit-based scholarships anywhere. So there's no academic scholarship either. The Ivy League is based on financial need. So it's really just, it's a completely separate process from us, which parts of it I like. Would it be great to say, hey, do you want to come to Princeton for free? It absolutely would. But on the other hand, there's also a different power dynamic. Like when you're providing free education for your players, in some way it puts you at a different level and a different relationship with them, because it's almost like you're doing them the favor. For me, my players are almost more like customers, right? They're paying for a service. It's up to me to provide them. So there's a little bit of a power structure difference. And I like not knowing who pays what in our locker room. I don't have to say, well, I think you're worth 50% scholarship and I think you're worth 75%. I'm glad I don't have to deal with that. I don't have to deal with any of the financial stuff. I will say it's always every player on my team, I would say minimum had 10 scholarship offers, full rides. Like our program is excellent and we have a lot of the top players from around the world, like Germany, Sweden, Canada, US. Some of our players had a full ride offer from every program in the country. And so it's always talking about the value of the Ivy League versus free scholarship, you know? So I am also very blessed that the financial aid is outstanding. So they really do a good job trying to accommodate families. Like instead of just saying, oh, we're not scholarship, everybody pays this amount. They really do a good job working with parents and saying, okay, this is what we think you guys could pay for Sally to come to school. And then so far, like everybody's said, okay.
And so related to that is you're differentiating your school and the Ivy League from other schools based on other attributes, not financial aid or not scholarship. So what are the things that, you know, what are the top 3 reasons that people choose Princeton besides the obvious of it's being an Ivy League and it's being great, you know, great academically?
I think for our recruits now, most of them are picking us for our hockey program, honestly, which is awesome for me. And then they pick based on their future. I mean, I think there's a deep understanding that still women aren't going to be making a significant living in the game of hockey, certainly not playing. So I think with most of the ones that choose our school, it's how can I use hockey to open doors that would otherwise be closed? And so having a school where it's a 5% acceptance rate, but now because I'm a great hockey player, that door that would be shut will now be open, and knowing what it sets you up for in your future later. So we profile a lot of our alums and show what they're doing because they're just amazing. Like we get such amazing people coming through our program and that are involved and that want to help after. So people who choose it are choosing it for their future, but their immediate choice is for the experience, for the culture, for the combination of amazing hockey. They want to try to win a national championship. They want to get a great education along the way. I mean, there's so many things. Like we have so many faculty, the class sizes are really small. So all those things factor in.
Got it. So then kind of transitioning now into your starting the recruiting process. the rule changes happened in 2019, where being able to make offers happens a little bit later. Maybe you could talk about now what the impact has been on the rule changes and how that has changed your process. What happens? So the key dates, I believe, are June 15th of a player's, at the end of the player's sophomore year, and then August 15th or September 15th of their junior year. What happens before that? That June 15th date in terms of what you're doing from a recruiting perspective or a scouting perspective, and then what happens after June 15th, and then, you know, the actual ability to make offers.
Yeah, honestly, this is a little bit of uncharted waters too, because it's all happening right now. So first of all, I'm thrilled that they put these rules in place, because it was getting out of control where seventh graders were deciding their college. It's just crazy. So it takes the pressure off that. It allows everybody some breathing room. The problem has been COVID. So in a typical world, we would get to go out and just be watching players at tournaments, watching them at showcases, building our list of players that we like. And then ideally on June 15, you can start the conversations with them, because it's really important to know who they are away from the rink. Are they going to fit in with your program? Are they going to fit in with your culture? Do they have the same value system? You know, what's, you know, talking to the coaches, what's their work ethic like? You know, can you coach them hard? Like, tell me. So all this stuff needs time. So ideally what we could do is go watch, think of the list, know who we're going to contact on June 15th, that summer, to build relationships, and then get them to come to campus and see.
Before June 15th, what is the potential level of interaction they can have with you? Is there, like, are you able to attend showcases and get on the ice with them? Things like that, camps, other things like that?
You can be involved if there's actual instruction and learning components. Like, you couldn't just go on and coach a game, so you can't interact that way. If the camp is set up so that there's learning and instruction, you can be on the ice, and then if it ends in games, that's okay, but it has to have that learning component. So then you can have some interaction there. You can't have any recruiting conversations, like I don't talk about Princeton or our hockey program. You can just talk about helping that player get better. And then, so that's really it. If someone emails us, we can read it, but we have to file it. We can't respond. The only information you're allowed to send out is a questionnaire that's been approved by your compliance. So you can send a questionnaire so you can have their information in your recruiting database.
If I'm wrong, some of that sometimes those questionnaires are actually on your team website that
yes,
that parents or players can fill out. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, try to do that, because it just gets names in there. If someone calls, we actually can't take the call. If we're like, oh, you know, you're only a sophomore, we can't have this conversation until June 15. Like, you really can't have any conversations, which is great. And then there's the third person loophole. The rule is, like, we can't call coaches and say, oh yes, they're our number one recruit, we're going to make them an offer. That's all illegal conversation. You're allowed to ask how they're doing. You're allowed to ask about, you know, their work ethic. You're allowed to ask about, you know, you can't even really like get grades or anything. It really has to be just kind of getting some background information. So they've really tried to slow the process. Unfortunately, this year, we haven't been allowed to recruit. We haven't been allowed to go on the road, and that recruiting dead period gets lifted on April 15th, hopefully. But then women's hockey has a quiet period for the month of May. So we have a self-imposed recruiting dead period. We're trying to get that changed for this year so we can go on the road. But other than that, we've only been allowed to watch video. So I know that a lot of recruits are panicking right now. Especially the Canadians haven't been able to play, so we can't even watch video. And I would encourage them to take a deep breath, that there are so many girls in the same situation as them, and to not panic. And it might be slower, but you know, everybody will end up finding their way in the end. But I actually coach a U16 team also, because my daughter plays on it, and they're all panicking. Like, they're all sophomores and freshmen, a couple juniors, and you know, they haven't been able to be recruited because no one can get out there. But we've barely been playing, so.
Gotcha. So let's get on to what it is that you value in a player. Um, how much does how you coach the team, the style of play of your team matter, and how much of it is also just the type of personalities that you're looking for, and maybe you can talk about the level of compete, because I believe that's something that's pretty important to you.
Yeah, that is probably what I look for first. Is it sounds weird and cliche, but I look for passion. I look for second effort players, because college hockey is a grind, and I think many players don't understand that. They think that like they've made it when they get to college hockey, and really it changes everything, because it becomes more of a grind. It becomes more of your job. It becomes a little less fun at times, because it's like every single day and you have to devote so much. So if you're not absolutely in love with the game, it will grind you down. But so I look for those players that love the game so much that when we're grinding, they love that. So the compete level is huge. I actually do try to look inside the face mask to see if they look happy doing it. And I know that sounds weird, but I feel like you can see it. You can see joy in kids when they're playing. And you can also see players who are out there because they happen to be good, or because it's their parents pushing them to places, and that's dangerous, like that's where you wonder, are they going to last? So yeah, I do look for a type of player that will fit in with our style. And then as you get to know players, they also self-select. Like, some people might think I'm too much, and they might be quieter, and they might connect better with a different coach. So the personalities do come into it. And I am fiercely protective of our culture. I feel like it took a long time to get it. So I want to make sure that I'm protecting that culture by bringing not just the right players, but the right families in, because our parents are involved. And I want to make sure we're bringing the right people in that we're going to have a great relationship for 4 years.
And I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, just given your background and what you said already. But how much do you value players having played multiple sports growing up? So and having that ambidextrousness to their athleticness.
I love multi-sport athletes. I find it's getting more rare and rare, but generally those multi-sport athletes don't peak as early. Like you'll see the players who are doing skills sessions and private lessons and from a young age and focus on hockey, hockey, hockey. Those kids definitely peak earlier, which is one of the issues with early recruiting, which is why I'm kind of happy, because the multi-sport athletes, it might take them a little longer, but when they fully develop, like they leapfrog. And I just think they can use so many different sports to translate into the game of hockey. And it's missing right now. Like you can see some of the stuff we're teaching now. I'm just like, did you never go play pickup basketball? Like puck protection? Like, did you never play lacrosse? Like, so some of the stuff you're teaching, you're wondering, why do I have to teach this? And it's mostly because they haven't played a ton of different sports and gotten lessons that, are taught on the field are different that are taught on the rink, So I love multi-sport athletes. I think it's harder and harder to find. It's so hard on parents right now. As a parent of athletes, it's really hard to do multi-sports, because if you want to make the fall team, you have to be on the spring team. And if you want to, be on the winter team, you better be doing your summer hockey. So it's really, really hard. And
And it gets even harder now with COVID, where people feel they're missing out. So, all spring and summer, every player is playing hockey if that's their number one sport. They're not playing baseball or soccer or basketball this summer.
Yeah.
All right. So talk about the scouting process in particular. When do you really start going in the normal year where you're able to go and talk to players? Where are you going? Which events are you going to? And what is it that you're looking for during those times? And I'm going to get actually specific about events, but when do you start going out? Because you have a season that starts at the end of September and runs through March. So you're probably only going to local events or drivable events during that period of time.
Well, I think every program does it a little bit differently. For us, like I want my coaches there to coach my players. So very rarely do my assistant coaches miss a game to go recruiting, but there might be 2 weekends a year where there's a major tournament on, where we have games, and they might have to miss one of those 2 games, like the Saturday game, to go recruit Saturday, Sunday at a big tournament. So I think for women's hockey, for all of our programs, all the NCAA programs, there's some major tournaments that get hit up that are in Canada and the US all over. And then it's more quiet in the winter, but like President's Day weekend, there'll always be a tournament somewhere and you might not have games. You'll get out to those. And then spring and summer, unfortunately, have become big times. Like everybody, I laugh because they go, "Oh, what do you do now that your season's over?" And I'm like, okay, it's actually way more busy in the off season than in season. So we go a lot of places. We go all over. Like we'll go all over Canada. We go all over the US. I mean, not really the southern US because there's not so much going on in those areas. Although Florida is popping up some tournaments where they bring in players. I've gone to Sweden a couple times. That's why we have some Swedish players. So we will go everywhere. And honestly, it's a combination between watching tournaments and watching showcases. And I will say that like, sometimes you see the same kids at every single showcase. And I just think they must be tired and it must be expensive. Like go to the lake and swim like we've seen you. Like you don't have to do every single showcase. You might want to pick 2 or 3 over that spring, summer time. I prefer watching tournaments where they're playing with their team because in showcases, the hockey's not as great, even though it's supposed to be best on best, but there's no,
Chemistry.
systems and they haven't clicked. So I really prefer watching them play with their team, like US nationals or the provincials in Ontario or Canadian nationals. Like those are where you see the best hockey and you can really get an idea of how they play the team game. Like showcases are often, you can see their individual talent.
Yep.
But you can't get a good feel of how they play within a team.
That's an excellent insight. And I can, reinforce that having done some research over the last week on all the showcases and tournaments that are coming up, Princeton is scheduled to be at every single one of them, just about, that I've seen. So kudos to you and your staff for making yourself available to all these events and having a great travel budget, basically.
Sometimes I see those and I'm like, oh, we're going to this. And I'm like, okay.
I actually want to get really specific. So you talk about seeing the player at, with their actual club team or prep school team. Are 2 of the key tournaments that you go to, the Naha Labor Day tournament and the Stony Creek ones historically, just in general, are those the kind of tournaments that you go to and you spend like a full weekend, and I think even Stony Creek's over multiple weekends? Are you going to the U16s or the U19s? So
that's a really good question. So we used to, we'll hit up all those major tournaments, and there's some in Detroit, there's some in Brampton. Like there's a bunch of the major tournaments where the club teams are playing. We'll hit up those for sure, and those are the ones where sometimes there's like 60 plus teams in them. So we'll send like sometimes you send one coach for a weekend. Some of the major tournaments, it's more like those lacrosse tournaments where every coach has to be there. So some of the big ones will send all 3 coaches. Especially if we're getting near the end of a process and we want to get 3 sets of eyes on one kid, like we'll try to all go at the same time. But 19, 16s, 14s. So obviously when I started, we were recruiting U19s, and junior year, you might have had a conversation, but they're really deciding fall of senior year. And that was when I started 10 years ago. They were going on 5 official visits. They were making their decision in the fall of senior year after going on their visits. Now, I mean, it went all the way very quickly. Within like 4 years, it went all the way to freshmen in high school and then below. And so I remember when people started watching the U16s and I was like, oh my goodness, we have to watch U16s. And then at one tournament, like it's a very small world, right? And they're like, did you know so-and-so was at the U14 tournaments? And you're like, what? And then that's where we were for years. We were at the U14s. Like no one was really watching the U19s. So now with the rule changes, probably U16, in my opinion, is going to be like the biggest set of eyes. We're probably still going to watch some 14s to see like who's coming up. So you're familiar with their development. And then you're probably checking the 19s now, just in case during COVID, somebody got missed.
Or also if they're Canadian, because many of them just have U19 teams. I spoke with Sarah Zacharias from Balmoral Hall in Winnipeg, and she was saying they only have a U19 team, so they need you to show up to their games. So
yeah.
Gotcha. All right. Well, this has been awesome. I got just a couple more quick questions. Most importantly, for the audience that listens to this podcast, what advice do you have for parents of players from 10 to 19 who are thinking about wanting to go Ivy League? What advice do you have? And maybe not even just Ivy League, because there are many other options out there.
Yeah, I say, first of all, take a deep breath and then make sure you're doing things for the right reasons, because you definitely can put your child on a path to NCAA. But in the end, are they going to be happy? So like for me, it's enjoy it, like play the game because you love it. Don't forget why you started playing it, because that's the stuff that shows up later. And I think too often we see a means to an end. So we're like, oh, we can use hockey to get a scholarship. And when you're kind of centered your path that way, it's not as rich or rewarding. So for me, it's like, just take a deep breath. Like you definitely do have to do some work as a parent to make sure you're doing what you can to support your child, but you're there to support them. You're not there to guide it. You're not there to drive the bus. It's really be in a supporting role, allow them to take the reins, and have trust in the process.
Nice. So now that we're at the end of this, what events are you planning to attend, or are you planning to put on? Where are you at with having a hockey camp this summer for girls?
Yeah, hopefully. So last year, obviously, the university didn't allow any outsiders on campus, and though they're still sorting through that. Hopefully we can have our camps back on campus, because actually we just have so much fun running them. They're a blast. And if not, we'll probably figure out how to get some local rinks so that we can put on something similar. But usually like when we run our camps, they stay in the dorms and they eat in the dining halls, and seeing the 12-year-olds walk around at a college dining hall, they're just so excited. So it's kind of makes a lot of the magic. So
what month of the year do you usually have it? What month of the year is it usually in July or August?
Yeah, usually July. So we're going to look July and August this year, just to put some together and hopefully get those out on the website so everyone will know about them.
So hopefully vaccination deployment has kind of hit its peak by then, so that makes that a strong option. And for folks who really want to figure out which events Princeton will be attending, they can go to the Champs App website. We have a calendar of all the different events, and as I kind of mentioned earlier, very likely if you click on any of those events, you'll see a little logo of the Princeton Tigers there saying that we're planning to attend. So you don't need to go through all of them yourself. I can just go to Champs App and you can see it, and I'll also include it in the show notes. So Cara, I really want to thank you so much for being on the podcast. This was awesome. For any parent who didn't know about the Ivy League, this is you answered almost everything that any parent would want to know, just about the general process and admissions and the hockey. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you, Cara. Take care.
Have a great day.
Well, I really enjoyed that conversation with Cara. Really appreciate her coming on the podcast. And it was great to hear more about what she's done with the Princeton Tigers, as well as hearing in detail about the women's college hockey recruiting process, especially for the Ivy League. And remember, if you got something out of today's episode, we'd really appreciate it if you would like, follow, subscribe, and even better, if you could leave us a review, so we can keep sharing this important hockey information with folks just like you.